One of the challenges we all face in our career journeys is deciding what direction to take, and that couldn't be more poignant than if you work in the field of development. Our next speaker is one of a small few who can take any hat within a development department, be it from a technical level all the way up to strategic leadership. Currently Head of Development for Brighton-based HolidayTaxis and co-organiser of PHP Sussex, Simon will explain how to progress a career within development, how you reach the next level, what skills developers need, both technical and soft, and how you can obtain or develop those skills.
Hi everyone, I'm Simon Downs and welcome to my talk on how to level up as a developer. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about developer levels, career planning and professional development, and hopefully give you a few key takeaways that you can apply to your own careers. Just want to start off with a quick warning. This talk is highly opinionated based as it is on my own career and experiences. Unfortunately, there are no step-by-step instructions or turnkey solutions for career progression and professional development. So a quick bit of background on me. I'm currently the software development manager at HolidayTaxis, where I manage a team of 15 developers across several teams. I'm also a co-organiser and occasional speaker at PHP Sussex, an RAF Air Cadet instructor. I play a fair amount of computer games as well when I have some free time. Professionally, I'm interested in topics like leadership, DevOps, and solutions architecture. So when we're talking about leveling up, probably the first question we need to ask is what is a level? There's obviously different takes on what a level could be, starting off with kind of classic job titles. Maybe you start as a junior developer, you go to a developer, maybe senior developer, lead developer. Those are all taken from my CV, my career in the past. You've also got things like the fancier job titles you might see over in somewhere like Silicon Valley or in bigger companies. So maybe something like an associate engineer, become an engineer, a senior engineer, staff engineer, senior staff engineer, and then principal engineer perhaps. Those are all taken from Circle CI's engineering competency matrix. Or you might have something more based on overall knowledge and experience. So you're talking things like maybe you're a beginner at something, you progress on to being a novice, intermediate, proficient, advanced, and then maybe become an expert. Those levels are all taken from the dictionary. Fortunately, this topic has kind of been asked already. Jeff Atwood of Stack Overflow fame, among others, made a blog post many years ago entitled The 8 Levels of Programmers, which I'm just going to summarize quickly for you now. So 8 levels of programmers, kind of starting at the bottom and working on our way up. At the start, you kind of have the bad programmer. You write code, but you really shouldn't. Please stop. I don't think that's going to apply to anyone watching this talk. And not really anyone that I've ever met in my career. I suppose the closest I could kind of come would be marketing people who have the ability to inject JavaScript directly on a website, which can cause problems. But they're not programmers, let alone bad ones. They're just trying to do their jobs. Next, you kind of got the unknown programmer. So it's a job, but it's not your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. You kind of do the 9 to 5, you write some code, you go home, and then you kind of don't think about things until the next day. Next, we have the amateur programmer. So you write code for fun outside of work. Look at some new tech, maybe do some open source contributions. So it's more than a 9 to 5. You're kind of looking at things outside of work as well. Then we have the average programmer, which probably applies to most of us. So you're good enough to know you're not great, and you may never be, but that's okay. So you're still doing things outside of work, you're pretty good, you're not the best, and you kind of know what you know, and you know what you don't know as well, and you're happy with where you are. Moving up then, we have the working programmer, which again might apply to quite a few of us. So you have a successful career as a dev, you're always in demand and respected by your peers. Next, we have the famous programmer. So you're famous in programming circles. People have heard of you and you're making an impact. Maybe you've written a well-used library, a framework, maybe you've even written a programming language, but you're that kind of famous. Next, we've got the successful programmer. So you're well known and have created an entire business around your code. Alongside which you have the freedom to decide what to work on. So maybe you've taken that thing that you've managed to build, whether it's the library, the framework, and maybe a SaaS product, and you've turned it into a business. And with that comes the success and being able to decide what you actually want to work on. And finally, we have the dead programmer, or in the comments on the blog post, which probably should have been labeled more legendary programmer. So you're part of the permanent historical record of computing, and other programmers study your work and writing. So the main takeaway from those is there's no single answer as to what constitutes a developer level. It means different things to different people and different companies. Different roles have different expectations in terms of skill sets, etc. So the real question is, where do you want to be in 3, 5, 10 years time? Which brings us on to career planning, and starting with the obvious question of where are you now? What kind of level do you see yourself at, maybe based on the levels that we spoke about previously? What role are you doing? What's your kind of job title? What's your skill set? What do you know? What do you not know? A little bit of introspection and self-analysis, being honest but not overly critical. Don't be too harsh on yourself. Just be honest about what you know, what you don't. And then from there, where do you want to be? What's your end game in terms of career goal? Do you want to be an IT director? Do you want to be a principal engineer? Do you want to move into a different industry? So realistically thinking about what kind of level would you want to be at? Do you want to be at the top level, top of your game? Do you want to be that famous programmer, legendary programmer, successful programmer, or do you just want to do the 9 to 5? Because there's nothing wrong with that. It's about being honest with what you want to do, and obviously this can change over time. Do you want to do a particular role? Do you want to do development? Do you want to move into management? Do you want to do Scrum Master, project management, etc.? What kind of company do you want to work for? Small, medium, large, startup? Do you have a particular company in mind? And what kind of industry do you want to work in? Do you fancy any industry, or are you particular about where you'd want to work? Maybe because you have some specific knowledge or background in a particular area. What location where do you want to work? Is commute time important to you? Do you want to relocate to a different country or different part of the country that you're in? And what kind of lifestyle do you want? Which can be driven by salary as much as it can by location and the company that you work for. Do you perhaps want to go for the digital nomad lifestyle? And then looking at what are the intermediate steps? So we know where we are, we know where we want to be. How do we get there? So breaking that down into smaller, discrete steps that we can use to get to our end goal. So what kind of roles do we need to fulfill between now and where we'd want to be? If you want, for example, if you want to be an IT director, it's unlikely you're going to jump straight from a junior developer or fresh graduate straight into that role. So it's about mapping out what you think you need to do to be able to get there. Especially what kind of skills you think that you would need that you're currently lacking, and any domain knowledge that you think you might need to gain along the way, particularly if you're looking at specific companies or specific industries, having a good background in that company or that industry in terms of technologies they use, languages they use, tools they use, how it works, etc. It's going to be very beneficial. And then looking at what's the next step. So now we've mapped out where we were, where we are, where we want to be, and the intermediate steps. So what is the next step on that career plan? And then basically executing on that step. So if it is to gain a particular skill, how do we gain that? If it's to perform a particular role, how do we get that role? Do we need to switch industries now, etc. So a few top tips for career planning, starting off with finding a good recruiter or two, or maybe three. Whenever you're putting your CV near Indeed or job site or anything like that, certainly I have in the past, you get an awful lot of recruiters then approaching you saying that they have the best role, can you have the latest CV, which oftentimes just leads to nothing, because sometimes they're just CV harvesting, or the roles don't exist, or you're unsuccessful for various reasons because you weren't a good fit in the first place. So finding a good couple of recruiters that actually bother to get to know you, what you're looking for, and what specifically where you want to go in your career can actually be really, really helpful. I personally work with a few hand-picked recruiters that I've worked with over the last couple of years. They know what I'm looking for or what my career goals are, and they can keep an eye out for any interesting roles that come along. It's not about the immediate filling a vacancy, it's about the long-term relationship, and that's really what you should be looking for in a good recruiter. Do build a network, obviously a professional network. Obviously LinkedIn kind of has the monopoly on professional networks, so if you're not on LinkedIn, do join it. You don't necessarily have to be super active, but just having those connections available so that when you are looking for your next role, or maybe you just want some advice about how to break into a particular company or a particular industry, or how to go about gaining a particular role, that can be a really good source of information, and perhaps even cut through some of the bureaucracy if you happen to know someone that works in a particular company or industry, or they can point you in the direction of someone that does. Do go outside your comfort zone. I think this goes more generally, really. You get better at things by pushing yourself, learning new things, failing, trying again, etc. I think going outside your comfort zone is probably the single best way of leveling up in anything. Without that, you're kind of just coasting along, which isn't really going to necessarily help your career plan. Unless, of course, your career plan is just to stay where you are, which, again, there's nothing wrong with that. As we said earlier, it's just about being honest with yourself about what you want to do. And do stay current. Technology, as we all know, moves along at such a rate. It's easy to get left behind. New versions of things come out regularly. I think the fundamentals stay relatively static, but certainly specific tools, languages, libraries, frameworks do move along quite a pace. So staying current with those should be towards the very top of your list in terms of career planning. Which brings us on to continuous professional development, which is also known as learning, something which I'm sure everyone listening to this talk does on a regular basis. We're all trying to stay current as best we can. So what I want to talk about is just briefly about how we learn as technology professionals. And as starting off with the obvious ways, reading, watching and listening. So things like reading books, articles, blog posts, watching some video tutorials, listening to podcasts are all obvious. And the last one on the list I put down as code, because I think that one of the best ways of learning and improving as a developer is actually looking at other people's code. And obviously you're going to see code in those videos, in those articles and books, but looking at other people's code in the real world, the problems that they're trying to solve, and especially the constraints that they have, can be very beneficial. Doing things like code reviews at work, or maybe just looking at the innards of a particular framework or library that you use to get a better understanding of how it's put together and why they've maybe made some particular design decisions or code style decisions, etc. The other big thing of learning is learning by doing. Obviously, by this, it's not just a case of writing code, but thinking about the experiences that you have. Have you worked in a particular single domain or a single industry throughout your career? Are you effectively niching yourself too much and restricting your future progression by doing so? Do you need to, or have you worked across different domains and different industries? Because they're going to work in different ways and have different problems, or need solutions to the same problems, but maybe in different ways with different constraints, all of which is valuable experience and is going to help you improve your skill set as a developer. Similarly, with different languages, have you worked with a particular language over the course of your career? This would be things like if you consider yourself to be a PHP developer or a Go developer or a Ruby developer, as opposed to a generic developer. So not necessarily having professional development experience across every different language, but are you using the same programming language for everything, or do you experiment a little bit? Do you know the difference between, or have you experienced the difference between functional programming and object-oriented programming, for example, even if you're not using it day to day? Because again, some of those learnings can be transitioned across different domains, different problem sets. Side projects, either have them or you don't, or I think everyone's kind of looking for, oh, what have you got on GitHub? Some people have large swaths of code that they've written and side projects that are really well put together. I personally have a whole bunch of randomly uncommitted stuff floating around my various hard drives, some of which gets pushed to GitHub in various forms of done, and then I'll get bored and move on to something else. It doesn't matter what your kind of side project is. I think just having one and playing around with things, whether it's a different language, a different way of working, maybe you're getting into something like Terraform or Ansible as opposed to the development side of things, etc. All of that is going to be very beneficial. Then you've got code carters, which are basically static problems that you then look at solving in different ways each time. So perhaps you kind of solve a relatively simple problem in one way in a particular language. Then you might look at it saying, okay, well, now I can use a library, or now I'll use a different language, or now I'll try a different technique or a different algorithm, etc. And there's loads of good websites online that can list out those kind of problems for you. The third kind of way, I think, of learning, which is probably the most important, is by collaborating. Teamwork makes the dream work, as I tell my team, much to their annoyance every day. Working as part of a team, you're going to be able to get a lot more done. It's especially very rare nowadays, I think, to find individual programmers that write massive systems by themselves. A lot of people, most people, are going to be working as part of a team, even whether that's just if not a development team, maybe just a wider business team, talking to project managers, designers, stakeholders, etc. Being able to work in a team and learning from your teammates is, I think, very, very important. Meetups, obviously, we're part of Silicon Brighton Online today, seeing as we can't go in person due to the coronavirus, but going to meetups, meeting different people, again, helping expand that professional network we were talking about earlier. You don't have to talk. If you want to do a talk, that's even better. But going to meetups can just expose you to a vast wealth of knowledge and experience from other people. Conferences, the bigger brother of meetups, so probably less personal, but more information, especially the bigger ones. But it's not just about the big conferences. There's a lot of smaller unconferences and local ones. It doesn't have to be everyone going to reInvent in Vegas, etc. There's lots of local meetups, or lots of local conferences rather, that are smaller in scale, often cheaper, and sometimes even free, which are going to be well worth a look. And again, when you're looking at things like meetups and conferences, maybe pick something that is a bit outside your comfort zone, so you don't have to know everything about a particular topic. Just head along to a meetup or a conference and just listen to the talks and pick up some related bits of information. Another way of collaborating, mentoring, whether having a mentor or being a mentee, either so basically teaching or learning from someone specific can be really beneficial. It doesn't have to be even particularly around coding or programming in general. It could be just having a career mentor, someone to kind of guide you and give you some advice on how to actually progress through your career plan, or even formulating one in the first place. Or it might be around a particular skill set that you're looking to get into. Maybe if you're a developer primarily, but you're looking to get into more the deployment side, finding someone with that skill set who can talk to you and take you through some of the concepts perhaps, and point you in the direction of some really good resources. And finally, we've got open source. Some people do a lot, some people don't do any, some people are in the middle. And again, it's kind of personal preference. Not everyone has the time to do open source contributions, but do consider it. It doesn't have to be writing code. It could just be writing tests, updating documentation, triaging issues, helping other people out. And especially those non-coding tasks are often overlooked, and everyone's looking for assistance with those. It could also be a really good way of learning your way around a particular tool, or gaining a particular skill, etc. So we've looked at how we're going to learn. Maybe we should look at now of what we should learn in terms of when we're leveling up. Kind of starting with the basics and computer science fundamentals, things like data structures, algorithms, complexity, big O notation, etc. Personally, I've not had much use for low-level data structure and algorithm knowledge over my career, purely by the roles that I've had. So again, if you've had a degree or got a degree, you'll probably have that background. If you've come from a self-taught background like I have, you might be lacking that. It might be something that you'll need to know, it might not. So having a look at your career plan and thinking, does anything on there stand out that I might need something like the CS fundamentals? I have found things, having an understanding of things around complexity and big O have actually been really useful regardless, in terms of understanding and optimizing solutions that have come up. Application architecture, so things like solid design patterns, services, whether microservices or just service orientated. How does a wider application sit together? Whether it spans multiple services or whether it's more of a monolith design, but how is the code structured? How do you separate layers? How do you separate concerns, etc.? And then kind of going up a level from that as well into the wider solutions. So thinking around things like caching, configuration, data, logging, queues, all those kind of things that maybe you access via a library or a helper, but then getting an understanding of what happens on the other end. You don't necessarily have to be an expert at being able to configure RabbitMQ, for example, but just having an idea of how queues work at the kind of more application or specific queue application level, rather than just what's happening in your code. Similar with data, realizing that not all data just goes into a relational database. There are other kinds of data stores, and looking at the kind of characteristics of data and then taking the decision on where's the best place to store that. Similarly for systems, so once we've gone around the solution, it's then looking on how it's running. So operating systems, how comfortable are you on a command line, whether that be a Linux shell or PowerShell, for example, on Windows. How those systems are provisioned, whether it's manually, CloudFormation, Terraform, those kind of things, and how they're configured. How do you get the desired configuration of the things that you've just built in order to run your applications? A little bit of under the hood stuff, so leaky abstractions and latency, socket streams and protocols, the kind of the lower level networking aspects. You don't necessarily have to know TCP/IP off the top of your head, but even just knowing things like the OSI 7 layer model and what the different layers are can be beneficial, especially when you're talking distributed systems and where latency is then going to really matter. Security, security is obviously a big thing, like a lot of the other things on this list. There's a large amount you can learn, starting with the kind of the basics, hashing, encryption, not necessarily how they work, but more what modern best practice is. If you're using MD5 still, that's probably a poor choice. So what is the kind of best practice in terms of hashing and encryption, password management, password resets, those kind of things. And then also looking at things like attack vectors and threat models. So you can easily go down a security checklist and go, yes, we've got really great password security, but where are the real threats to your application or your business? And kind of guiding that bigger picture knowledge. It's not just necessarily the application, it could be the infrastructure, it could be the people, etc. Where are the real threats? Falsehoods and gotchas, so things like character coding, time, names. There's a big awesome list of falsehoods that programmers believe online, and then having an understanding of those kind of gotchas, especially when you come across dealing with names, first name, second name, not everyone has those. Things like postcodes, telephone numbers, addresses. Character encoding is a great one. Obviously, most things nowadays are UTF-8, but if you ever encounter something that isn't UTF-8, trying to work out what it is or convert it to UTF-8 can be a fun game of cat and mouse and going around in circles. Finally, but by no means least, testing. Whether it's test-driven development, behavior-driven development, automation, pipelines, CI/CD, all that kind of aspect of testing. That is a relatively large list. And also a relatively short list of things that you should learn or should learn. You don't necessarily need to know everything. It's probably just some ideas for you to look at, again, with your career plan, where you want to go, what kind of things are you strong at, what are you weak at, what do you think you need to brush up on. But it's not just all about the tech. Obviously, that's a very big list of technology. There's almost an infinite amount of technology terms and skills that we can learn about, but they're not the be all and end all of being able to level up as a developer. Soft skills are just as important. And again, similarly to technology skills, there's a very long list of things that you can learn. I just want to highlight a few things here that I think are actually quite important, especially when you're planning your career and looking to level up. The first one, which I think generally gets missed, is business awareness. So just having an awareness of what your business does, or what businesses do in general, how they make money. What are your business's quarterly and yearly goals? If you know what your goals, your company's goals are, it becomes a lot easier to then plan your work around achieving those goals. If you're kind of going off on some tangent, wanting to do something really cool technology wise, but the business has no need for it, that's going to create a lot of unnecessary friction. You might find that once you know what those goals are, you can come up with a really innovative solution that ticks boxes for both yourself and your progression, as well as business needs as well. Why and how they decide on priorities. Businesses make decisions about things all the time, whether that's projects, priorities for tickets, or whatever that might be. Understanding and why and how they come to those decisions can be really important, I think. And how budget works, the kind of key one being, we don't have any money for that, we can't afford that tool. Being realistic about, how big is your company, what the budget is, how much money do they have to spend on particular tools. Not everyone can afford enterprise level tools, not everyone even needs them. Can you save the company some money somewhere? Are they using a very expensive tool that actually there's an open source alternative or a cheaper alternative that would be more suitable? Pitching that can definitely win you political points in the business arena, which probably becomes more important the kind of higher up the hierarchy you go in a business. Likewise, if you do manage to save them some money in a particular area, is that money then available for you to spend on other areas of IT or technology or development, or does that go back into a bigger pot and you might not actually get what you want? So if you're looking to save money over here to spend on something else, is that actually a possibility, or are you just saving money? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but just understanding how that works. Communication, which is obviously the big soft skill that everyone talks about a lot. People talk a lot about email, in person, on the phone, Slack, all that kind of stuff. I kind of want to talk about a couple of things, or mention a couple of things. One of which is personality types and understanding which you are. This is not a defining a thing that defines you. It's just getting a better understanding of how you are as a person. Are you introvert, extrovert, detail orientated? Do you like to finish a task? Are you a bit of a procrastinator? None of those things are meant to be negative, but just being realistic and understanding about who you are is going to set you in good stead. Similarly, communication preference styles. Are you the kind of short, sharp, give me the information, thanks very much? Do you want to understand more about the people, their feelings? Do you want to get an understanding for where they're coming from? Understanding what your kind of preferences are, but then also what other people's preferences are and how you interact. And then that's a really good way of helping avoid friction in teams. Certainly as a manager, it's something that I like to understand about myself, but then also my team and those people around me as well, so that we can actually all get on and do the best work we can. Teamwork, already mentioned before, again, being part of a team is quite key. Very rarely are you going to be hired as a solo developer, and even if you are, as the business grows, you're then going to be finding yourself amongst other developers, hopefully, as the team grows. So kind of learning, if you like, how to play well with others, not taking things personally, understanding how to compromise, how to negotiate, not looking to kind of get your way the whole time, but then also understanding when to kind of put your point across and make those assertiveness decisions. Open-mindedness, I think, is another big one for developers. We can also be a lot kind of fixed in our ways, wanting to go about things our way, whether it's tabs versus spaces or particular coding styles, etc. and also giving and receiving feedback. So how well do you accept constructive criticism? How well do you give criticism? Is it constructive? Are you raging on a pull request because someone did something different to how you would do it? Or is your concern actually, legitimate in the broader context? I like to say have strong opinions that are weakly held. So I'm quite opinionated on a lot of things, which may have come across in this talk. But those opinions I like to think are weakly held. So if someone were to come and challenge me on one of my opinions, I'm open-minded enough to then take that information on board and let it sway me. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. But that's the beauty of discourse, really. So, in summary, then, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about various levels. I'm going to go with a few key points to take away. Have a career plan. We went through the ins and outs of that, just thinking about where you are, where you want to go, and how you're going to get there. Finding a good recruiter or a couple to helping you on your way of A, creating that career plan, and B, then progressing through it. Do keep learning. We spoke a lot about ways of learning and what to learn. If you haven't been to meetups, maybe start doing that. If you're looking for conferences, check those out. Maybe try mentoring. All those kind of things that are a bit beyond the read a book or watch a video. Don't forget about the soft skills. As we said, they're just as important, if not more so, than the technology skills. Certainly when I'm looking to hire people, I probably care more about can I and the rest of the team work with this person than the particular technical skills that they have. I can teach people technical skills. We've already covered that. People learning how to work well in a team and how to receive criticism constructively are a lot harder to teach. So if you've already got those, that I consider that to be more important in a lot of ways than pure technology skills. And do push yourself outside your comfort zone, whether that's learning a new technology, applying for a new job, pushing yourself for a role that maybe you don't think you're quite good enough for. Maybe you are. Maybe they'll offer you the job and then you'll figure it out as you go. Maybe you won't get the job and then maybe you try again, or you ask for feedback and get some tips on what you need to do to improve. I think either way, just pushing yourself outside your comfort zone is going to help you level up immensely. I'll put up a few resources in terms of books, online courses, and code carters. I'm not going to go through them all a lot. O'Reilly Learning have an awful lot of books available. O'Reilly Publishing, all of their materials online along with a load of videos. It is about $500 a year. So it's relatively expensive. Maybe you can get your company training budget to cover it. But it is a very, very good resource. A couple of books on there. Code, The Hidden Language of Computer Hardware and Software, kind of goes from the base fundamentals of computer systems. Very interesting read, just for a bit of background, if you like, on computation. And The Manager's Path was invaluable for me when I took on my current role as a software development manager. But it covers every kind of role as well, including that of individual contributor. And it kind of explains, what your manager's or what your boss's job is as well, and maybe gives you a little bit of context in how organizations work as well. So that's worth a read, even if you're not a manager. And there's a few things on code carters at the bottom as well. If you're interested, give them a shout, give them a look for lots of different problems that you can solve, some of which are easy, some of which are ridiculously difficult. But again, it's about pushing yourself out your comfort zone and trying new things. That's the talk. Thanks so much for listening. Hopefully you managed to get some takeaways to apply to your careers and help you level up as a developer. There's some links on the screen. Feel free to reach out, connect, ask questions, provide feedback. I'm happy to help wherever I can. Before I go, I just want to say a massive thank you to the NHS and all those doctors, nurses, porters, cleaners, receptionists, managers, and everyone else working to save lives during the coronavirus outbreak. You're amazing. Much love to you and yours. Stay safe, everyone, and I'll catch you on the flip side.